Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the comments of Mr. Cullen, and of course I appreciate the comments of Mr. Boissonnault. I have prepared comments that I'd already prepared for today, which I will read, but before that, Mr. Chair, I did want to make a few points. First of all, in your preamble opening up today, you indicated that Canadians are rightly concerned, and I agree, and that we do want to make sure that Canadians understand. But you've also said in the past, Mr. Chair, that you believe the Prime Minister, and you believe that you don't need to speak to the Prime Minister personally, because I don't believe you have, in order to judge whether or not what the Prime Minister says is the accurate description of what is exactly happening. And what is happening is the contention that allegations have been made that the Prime Minister's office has politically interfered with the office of the Attorney General. That is why we're here today. Mr. Boissonnault, in opening up today, said that there is a clear concern with Canadians. I agree. But then he also went on to say that the Prime Minister has been clear, and I fundamentally disagree with that. The Prime Minister has not been clear. That is exactly why we're sitting here today. The Justice Committee does have a responsibility, but it's to get to the bottom of what's going on, not to do what Mr. Boissonnault said, which is to assure Canadians that what the government is doing is okay. That is not our job here. Our job is to ask tough questions of witnesses to determine whether or not there has been some kind of wrongdoing. And that's exactly by which the spirit we approach this meeting today. I agree we need to shine a light, as Mr. Boissonnault said. And I agree that we don't want to impact court proceedings, but I don't see how having a conversation about the interior workings of the government vis-a-vis the Attorney General's office is going to have an impact, because it's all about political interference and whether or not there was inappropriate political interference put on the Attorney General. I also appreciate, Mr. Chair, that you fully understood and knew that we were bringing the motion together today. You'd have to live under a rock not to know that we were going to be doing that. And I also know, because you said it today, that you recognized Mr. Boissonnault first. It is your purview, but I think it's important to understand that despite the fact you knew we were coming forward with the motion, you decided to recognize the Liberal member before in order to make sure that we were not going to be able to put forward our motion. And that is noted for me. And as I said before, I do believe, Mr. Chair, that having read your comments to the press in the past number of days, that I would have to question whether or not you have bias in the issue, since you've already said that you believe the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office in this matter. And that's what we're here to get to the bottom of. So with that, I would like to outline, of course, that this is a very important issue, that media reports have revealed very troubling allegations with respect to possible interference by the Prime Minister's office in the criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, and further, that instead of fulfilling his duty to providing clarity to Canadians and living up to his lofty campaign rhetoric around openness and transparency, the Prime Minister has obfuscated and he has dodged. First, his story was that the media report was false. Then, when the position became untenable, his story changed. He admitted that while there were conversations between senior staff and the PMO and the Attorney General, there was no direction given. But then, through anonymous sources and media reports, the smear campaign began. The story became about how Jody Wilson-Raybould was difficult to get along with and only in it for herself. And I cannot tell you that as a female leader in this country, from business and politics, that standard gendered criticisms of female leaders is absolutely unacceptable. And I'm so disappointed that the Prime Minister and nobody from his office came out to defend these, came out to say that these were wrong and nobody should be making those comments. I take Mr. Cullen's point, his point of view that we shouldn't have gone and made the social media comments that we did. But where is anybody on this side saying that those comments about Jody Wilson-Raybould that came from within the PMO are acceptable in this land? We know that's not acceptable. We know that they shouldn't have been said, and we know what they were meant to say. And then it changed further to become about the meetings that the Prime Minister had last fall, to tell at the time the Attorney General that decisions related to the Public Prosecution Service were hers alone. The Prime Minister even went so far as to say that Jody Wilson-Raybould's presence in the Cabinet should actually speak for itself. And then yesterday, it all changed again, when Ms. Wilson-Raybould resigned from Cabinet. In his press conference last night, the Prime Minister changed his story again, essentially this time accusing Ms. Wilson-Raybould of turning a blind eye to misconduct in his own office. Now, it's been an extraordinary evolution of the Prime Minister's story, but what it does show is that this is not a government that we can show Canadians is under control. This is a government that we can show Canadians is in total chaos. And it raises critical questions of ethics and conduct from the highest-ranking staff in his office. What we know, thanks to the reports from the Globe and Mail, that pressure was applied to the Attorney General to overrule the Director of Public Prosecutions and advocate for a deferred prosecution agreement for SNC-Lavalin. What form did this pressure take? We need to know when and how. Did Katie Telford speak to Jody Wilson-Raybould about SNC-Lavalin? We need to know when and how often. Did Gerald Butts speak to Jody Wilson-Raybould about SNC-Lavalin? We needed to know when and how often did Matthew Bouchard speak to Jody Wilson-Raybould about SNC-Lavalin. We do know that he met with SNC-Lavalin a frequent number of times. We need to know when and how often did Elder Marquez speak to Jody Wilson-Raybould about SNC-Lavalin, and we need to know to when and how often did the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, speak to Jody Wilson-Raybould about SNC-Lavalin. Further, we have learned from court proceedings that there has been a high degree of cooperation between the Privy Council Office and the Public Prosecution Service in the matter of Vice Admiral Mark Norman. The judge even said in open court, "So much for the independence of the PPSC." That is a grave statement to be made by somebody holding the esteemed position of judge in this country, and that is something that parliamentarians should take note of and do absolutely everything we can to get to the bottom of what's happening. Canadians deserve to hear from the Director of Public Prosecutions as to what her standard practices are. How often has she spoken with PCO about ongoing matters, including SNC-Lavalin? And did PCO act to launder the communications from the PMO? Did the Director of Public Prosecutions speak to PMO directly? If so, when and to whom? Canadians also deserve to hear from Jessica Prince. Ms. Prince is an accomplished attorney who has been serving as the Chief of Staff to Minister Wilson-Raybould, as she then was. And as a former minister, I know that there's a frequent and significant contact between what's known as the centre, in other words, the PMO and PCO, and the minister's Chief of Staff. Ms. Prince can tell us if anyone pressured her into taking any action or relaying directions for action to the minister. And if such pressure was applied, who did it, when did it happen, and what form did it take? And to really get to the crux of the matter, we need to hear from former Minister Wilson-Raybould herself, because she can provide clarity on this matter as the primary person involved. And I would also call on Prime Minister Trudeau to waive any notion of solicitor-client privilege so that there can be full transparency and accountability. You know, Mr. Chair, you said in the last few days that you're concerned about the partisanship of the committee and that you were not going to support our motion because it was too partisan, but the reality is the truth is not a partisan issue. Canadians do expect the truth, and we have the power here to make sure that they get it. And I sincerely hope all members of this committee will recognize that. I'm not satisfied with the motion either, as Mr. Cullen has said, but I look forward to hearing from the other members as to what they have to say, and I thank you for your time.